Our first reading this morning comes from Matthew's Gospel. A brief few lines of some of Jesus' teachings. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." And then from the book of Exodus, the story of Israel's rescue from slavery. Israel has gathered at Sinai after their escape from Pharaoh, and there God speaks to all of them. Then God spoke all these words, "I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, Yahweh your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name Yahweh your God, for Yahweh will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the seventh day and consecrated it." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. As a general rule, I have tried not to talk about my children in my sermons. I was never a preacher's kid, but I can only imagine that it would have been terrifying for your parent to get up in the pulpit and tell personal stories of which you were one of the stars. And so I've avoided it. But now that she is grown and gone and married, I suppose it's fair game to tell a small story of my oldest daughter. When Kendrick was a toddler, she hated going to bed. We were okay with her not liking going to bed and going to sleep, but she had to stay in her room and stay fairly quiet. But this was not acceptable to her. She was forever coming out of her room to ask something, to get something she had forgotten, to tell something that could not wait, and on and on. And it got so ridiculous that we finally crafted a rule that was intended to subvert all the new reasons she was always inventing for needing to come out of her room. And the rule stated simply, you may not come out of your room unless you are injured and bleeding. Now, imagine you're a young parent and you're looking through a child-rearing book and you get to the section on guidelines for toddlers, and it says in there, toddlers should not come out of their bedroom after bedtime unless they are injured and bleeding. I suspect that at the very least you would find such advice a bit odd. The rule actually worked quite well at our house, but it makes little sense without context. And that is perhaps even more true for many of the 10 Commandments. They make little sense without proper context. In recent years, the Ten Commandments have become more of a political symbol than they are actually rules and guidelines for people to live by. Few Christians can rattle off all 10 of them, although many Christians have very strong opinions about whether or not they should hang on the courthouse wall. They're the basis of our civil law, some people insist, which I think pretty much backs up my point about people not knowing what they actually say. Quite a few of the different commandments have nothing to do with our civil law. And the one that there is in there about coveting, we didn't hear it today, but the one about not coveting pretty much undercuts one of the major driving forces in the American economy. Those civil laws that do make, or those that make it into our civil laws, those that are connected to the commandments, I'm not sure really needed an endorsement from God. I mean, surely we would have come up with laws against murder and theft all by ourselves. I'm not a lawyer. I know we have plenty here, but I'm not one. But I'm betting that there's little reason in law school to cover the commandments that we just heard today. These commandments we heard today are sometimes referred to as the first table or the first tablet of the law. They're the ones that deal with the divine-human relationship. Although the commandment about Sabbath occupies something of a middle ground, connecting the laws about the human-divine relationship to the laws about the relationship with human and neighbor. Notice that these commandments do not come in a nice, neat list. They don't start with a bunch of rules. They don't come as a succinct set of bullet points suitable for framing and hanging on the wall. They start with context. I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Without remembering slavery in Egypt and the misery of Pharaoh's oppressive economic system, we will misunderstand and even perhaps misapply a number of these rules. According to the Exodus story, Israel was a provider of bricks as a part of Pharaoh's vast economic enterprise. Egypt was the superpower of that day, and the rich, fertile Nile Valley produced a great deal of its wealth, and Pharaoh controlled this system, including the religious apparatus that went with it. The gods of Egypt guaranteed the reliability of the Nile and the grain crop, and so Pharaoh's economy. And this economy required massive building projects. Not only did Pharaoh need vast warehouses to store all of this grain that he's controlled, but he also needed grand temples and grand monuments to royal power. Bricks, more bricks. The Egyptian taskmasters ordered the Israelites. And if you remember your Exodus story, God hears the moans and the cries of the oppressed Israelites and sends Moses to Pharaoh. When Moses first speaks to Pharaoh, the request is not that the Israelites leave Egypt for good. Rather, it is that they go into the wilderness for a 3-day festival where they will offer gifts and sacrifices to their God, Yahweh. But Pharaoh has no use for this God, Yahweh, who dares interfere in his economic system. He responds, "Why are you taking the people away from their work? Get to your labors." And Pharaoh is so appalled at this threat to his economic system that he increases the oppression on the Israelites. They will no longer be provided straw, one of the raw materials for the bricks, something that had been previously provided to them. But their quota will not be reduced. Bricks, more bricks. The command continues to be. And of course the Israelites can't meet the quota, and so they are beaten by their taskmasters, and they cry out to Pharaoh about how unfair and how unjust this system is. To which Pharaoh responds, "You are lazy, lazy. That is why you say, 'Let us go and sacrifice to Yahweh.' Go now and work, for no straw will be given you, but you shall still deliver the same number of bricks." There is no end to the demand. Bricks, more bricks. You are lazy, lazy. Pharaoh's words sound remarkably like those of some today who disparage the poor and say that their plight has nothing to do with an unfair system or unjust system. As the gap between rich and poor grows larger and those at the bottom have to work 2 jobs just to survive, they complain that this is not fair, that I need some help, and the response is, "You are lazy, lazy. Get to your labors. Bricks, more bricks." The Egyptian gods are all for this arrangement. In fact, they support and legitimate it. They think it's just a grand idea. And it turns out you can tell a lot about gods by the sort of economic system it is that they support and sustain. The Egyptian gods are gods of bricks, more bricks, back to work, you lazy slaves. And so are many of the gods that we serve in modern day America. Gods of relentless, anxious pursuit of more and more, of more production, of more efficiency. Anxious gods who cannot stop, who cannot rest, whose only command is bricks, more bricks. I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. As God gives the first commandment, it's critical to realize just who this God is, this Yahweh who has rescued Israel from the oppressive, anxious production system of Pharaoh. And in fact, this first commandment may actually be less a command and more a statement about Israel's rescue. It may not actually be a true shall not. It's written differently in the Hebrew than the rest of the shall not commands. They all say, you shall not something. This first one says, there shall not be to you any other gods before me. You have been rescued from these anxious Egyptian gods of more bricks, more bricks. You have been freed. There shall not be these gods before you any longer. The commands that follow speak to the peculiar nature of this strange God, Yahweh. And perhaps none speak more to that peculiar nature than the command for Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore Yahweh blessed the seventh day and consecrated it. Yahweh is not an anxious God, worried that things may spin out of control if everybody doesn't keep their nose to the grindstone. Neither is Yahweh a legitimator of oppressive economic systems. Instead, Yahweh commands rest for one and all. There is no need for bricks, more bricks. You have been freed from those anxious gods. Why would you ever return to them? Oh, but we do. And in so doing, we end up supporting Pharaoh's oppressive system. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden light." Put another way, I am not a God of bricks, more bricks. Your life is not about relentless pursuit of more, about endless production. You are not defined by production or consumption. Why would you ever return to the gods that still seek to enslave you? Walter Brueggemann, in his book Sabbath as Resistance, ends the chapter on Sabbath and the first commandment, on which this sermon is sort of loosely based, with these words, and I'm going to simply end with them myself. They're printed on the front of your bulletin. Enlightenment-based autonomous Christians may find the Sabbath commandment the most urgent and the most difficult of the commandments of Sinai. We are, liberals and conservatives, much inured to Pharaoh's system. For that reason, the departure into restfulness is both urgent and difficult. For our motors are set to run at brick-making speed. To cease, even for a time, the anxious striving for more bricks is to find ourselves with a light burden and an easy yoke. It is now, as then, enough to permit dancing and singing into an alternative life. Thanks be to God.